Hi, today I am doing my review of the novel The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I recently read this for the first time. I had been wanting to read it for a little while. It's a very popular old book, and I decided to finally move it up on my TBR and finally read it because I had just been hearing a lot about it. So I decided I would go ahead and read it, and it's less than 300 pages, so it's not very long. I was hearing about this from a few booktubers, but especially Pat from Book Chat with Pat because she really loves this book and has mentioned it a lot, and so after hearing about it so much, I decided I would go ahead and read it. And because it's a really popular book, I know that a lot of people who see this will have read it, or at least they will be familiar with it. So hopefully we can have some nice discussions from this. Now, a lot of my book reviews have been spoiler-free, but this one is a spoiler review. I will basically be going over the whole book and we'll be talking about things that happen at the end. So there's your warning, and let's get started. So this book is about a teenage boy named Holden. I believe he's 17 when he's telling the story. Basically, the whole book is him telling a story. So everything in the book is in past tense. I believe he's 16 during the events of the story, and he has recently been kicked out of his preparatory school that he goes to. And this book is basically about the beginning of that and just him walking around places, mostly in New York. And it kind of doesn't have much of a plot, in my opinion. We'll get more into that, but yeah, it's about him just right after that walking around, exploring different places, doing different things, interacting with different people. I think this book is less about a plot and a goal and more about like ideas and him. So I think it's definitely more character driven. It's more about his thoughts. It's in first person, so you get to hear a lot of his thoughts about a lot of things. Now, I know I have heard it's implied from the beginning that he is telling the story from a mental hospital. So like at the end, he decides to get help. So that's where he is, where he's telling the story. I have some mixed feelings on this book. I feel like this is the kind of book where some people really like it and some people really do not like it. And of course there's the middle. I'm in the middle. I definitely feel like I understand it, but I will still say some of my, I guess you could say, complaints about it are more so just things that weren't as enjoyable for me. And there were also some things I liked about it. I liked some things about this, but when I finished it, I did not feel that I absolutely loved it. I'm glad that I read it, especially because it's such a popular book. I'm glad that now I know what it's like and what's in the book, but I guess I didn't enjoy this as much as I thought I would. And it started off pretty strong in the beginning. I felt that it was really easy to get into. Like some books take a little while longer and then I become more invested. With this, I was pretty invested from the beginning. I do feel that this book was generally pretty easy to follow along with. It's quite old. It was originally published in the 40s or 50s, but for the most part, it feels somewhat contemporary. There are some differences, especially when it comes to the language or the way some things are spelled or written. And of course, some things in this character's world aren't the same as ours, but I think a lot of the feelings, which I'll touch on later, are very much the same. And just the way it's written isn't super complicated, so it was pretty easy to follow along with, which I like in a book. I wrote in my notes early on reading this that Holden feels like a real person, and I would say I still agree with that. I think that he, as a narrator, has a very distinct voice. And there are many certain phrases and things that he repeats, which I think is a normal thing. If you know someone, you probably know some things that they say a lot. So it felt realistic. I don't think there was anything about him that was unrealistic. Moving back a little bit, I'm thinking more about how I described the plot of this, and I feel like I didn't do a super great job at that. So I did remember another pretty important detail. The reason why he's just walking around and going to places instead of just going home after being kicked out of school is because he has decided to leave a little early than he was supposed to, and his parents don't know he's been kicked out of school and they're going to be upset, so he doesn't want them to find out early, so he's just doing things in the meantime. So that's an important aspect of it as well. So he's just finding things to do before going back home. This is basically realistic fiction. I would say contemporary, but I feel like contemporary also means like modern. I guess it was contemporary at the time, but I want to be careful when using that because I thought contemporary just meant realistic fiction. I thought those two were interchangeable, but maybe not. So I'll just call this realistic fiction, and I do think this would be considered young adult because the main character is a teenager. I think this was definitely one of the oldest young adult novels, and I would say I usually really enjoy contemporary / realistic young adult fiction. I typically enjoy teenage angst, which I had heard was involved in this book, and there's definitely a lot of that in here, which I'll talk more about. But yeah, I usually enjoy that sort of thing. So before I read this, I was pretty excited to finally read it and to get to it, and I guessed that I would probably like it. As I said, it was pretty easy for me to follow along with. A lot of times there were just walls of text, mostly about like Holden's thoughts of something or a story he's telling. Like whenever he would introduce a character, he would always give like a whole backstory and maybe tell a story about them. I kind of like that though, because I think that helped the characters stand out a bit more, even though sometimes I think I did get them kind of confused. I don't feel that they all had like super distinct personalities of their own. Like some I kind of remembered who they were and what their role was, and some not as much. It's pretty much just like students he went to school with, or his old teachers, or his family. His family definitely had easier characters to distinguish from, or like girls he knew. And sometimes I guess I would get them confused looking back at it. Like I know there are two girls, like there's a girl named Jane and a girl named Sally. And right now I'm trying to remember the difference between the two. And it took me a little while to read this. It wasn't that long ago that I finished it, but I'm thinking about it and I couldn't really tell you much of the backstory between the two, much of the difference, or between some of the other characters as well, like some of his roommates, or maybe just schoolmates early on. And sometimes you just don't remember much about a book after reading it, and sometimes it can just be if it wasn't very memorable. But yeah, I didn't really mind the walls of text, especially earlier on in the book, like the first half, and those felt pretty easy to read through as well. I think maybe some parts of this book could be considered timeless. I don't mean like scenes, I just mean, just like I said, how it, for the most part, feels kind of modern, especially just when it comes to the feelings that he goes through. Like if I had been told that this was written a few decades after it was published, I feel like that would have been pretty believable. One thing I like about this book, like I said, it's realistic. I feel like this book shows that not everything, including like especially teenagers, just younger people, it wasn't always innocent. Like some books from that time would have portrayed teenagers as these innocent, well-mannered people. Some were like that and some were not. This book is very honest. There's a lot of swearing in this book. There is a lot of behavior like smoking, drinking, and that sort of thing. So yeah, this book is very honest, instead of just acting like all teenagers back then were proper, which I feel like is what I saw in books before from around that time. This book shows us, as I think we could use reminders of, that in a way, teenagers have always been the same and have always struggled with the same feelings. We may struggle with that when we have like older people in our lives. We may think they don't understand us. And yes, not everyone can understand or relate to everything, but I think overall, I think each generation has a lot in common, more than we think, and they've been through similar things that we have, even though the world's been different. Maybe even some of those people forget as they get older, but I think this book is a good reminder of that, because I think a lot of people, teenagers especially, could read this and really resonate with a lot of Holden's thoughts and feelings, and perhaps feel not alone. Maybe in this case, that's one of the things I love about books. They can put complicated feelings into words, like, because this is a book, so it's filled with words, but in real life you might be struggling with a certain thing, especially mentally, and you may not know how to word it, but maybe he says something and you're like, yeah, that is how I feel. As I said, he gives a lot of backstory every time a character is introduced, every time he's interacting with someone who he already knows. And over time, we also learn more about his family and things that have happened in his family. We learn that there have been some tragedies, like he had a younger brother who passed away. And I think that is a lot of cause for the mental struggles he is having. So I want to touch on something that I hear talked about a lot when it comes to this book. And that is, do I think he is whiny? Would I describe him that way? Because I know that Pat from Book Chat with Pat, for example, talks about how she thinks he is not, and that he is suffering greatly. He is grieving. She doesn't think of him as a whiny teenager. A lot of people do. A lot of people say this book is just a teenager complaining. And I will say, yeah, it is a lot of complaining, for sure. I can't deny that. But do I think he's whiny? Is that the word I would use? How do I see this? Because a lot of this book is a lot of just him complaining. I don't know if I'd say whining, but I think there is a lot of negativity, for sure. I mean, I've heard that complaint about book protagonists before, and I don't think I've ever really described a protagonist in that way. I guess I don't really use that word, especially because I feel like this book does touch on important things. I like that this book has a male protagonist, it's from that time period, and that the protagonist is so open about how he feels. I think that's important, especially for men, especially for that time. I could see perhaps teenage boys at that time maybe feeling seen by this book and comforted. So I think that that's important. I personally think it's very important to talk about feelings, and I don't think that somebody just talking about their problems or even complaining is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think it's a problem if you take it out on other people or you're not really doing anything to fix your situation. A lot of the music I like could be considered by some people as whiny, but I don't really see it that way. I think if people are just expressing their emotions, that's a good thing. I think it's important to get it out in a healthy way. And plus, many people mention, like, he's not just a whiny teenager, he's grieving, his brother has died, like, he's going through all these big, intense things. And I do think that's true. Although I personally don't think that you need, like, some kind of family tragedy in order to be sad. Like, some teenagers still go through all these complicated hormones, and maybe they don't have a big death in the family or anything similar, but they can still feel complicated. I still think that that is valid. And some of this, I guess I saw less as complaining and more of just his thoughts. Like I said, he gives a lot of his thoughts. He talks a lot about people and society and things that he doesn't like, and I can get that. I think we all have things about people in society we don't like. I generally enjoyed hearing his thoughts. I agreed with some of it not as much, but I still was interested to hear his thoughts, and I think he explains things well. Like, I don't think he just says something, like he just says he doesn't like something. Like, he'll explain why, might give a story. I like that he explained things. In general, I think being a teenager and just being a part of the world can be stressful, overwhelming, anxiety-inducing, all those things. And so I think that even if he hadn't had a brother who died, I still would think a lot of his complaints are valid. Again, if you're like hurting anyone as a result, I don't think that's okay. But I guess he doesn't really do much of that. I think he's mostly harming himself by having bad habits like smoking and drinking and all that, and, you know, not applying himself in his education. I think a lot of his complaints I understand, and I think they're reasonable. I mean, I just understand a lot of things, and I try to. Even with fictional characters, I try to understand where they're coming from and why they feel the way they do, and I'm interested in psychology and just realizing, like, what people have been through and how that affects how they behave now. I also will say that I do a lot of complaining myself, mostly mentally, not so much publicly, but I mean, I think that people complain a lot, some more than others, so I could relate, especially as a teenager. I think I complained a lot. So yeah, let's not act like Holden is just this really negative person and nobody else is like that. Like I said, I think he's pretty realistic. Now, yeah, I think he seems a bit more miserable than the average person, and I think that he just has some important values, like, for example, authenticity seems quite important to him. As for if he's complaining in a spoiled or rude way, like some people may describe him, I don't know if I describe him that way. I mean, I think he's definitely honest. I think it's a bit complicated though, so if you'd like to let me know your thoughts on that specifically, then let's discuss it. So early on in this book, I was invested. I felt it was pretty easy to follow along with. I was interested in seeing how it would end. About halfway through was when it got not as good for me. I don't know if it was about the contents of the book itself, but I did find myself feeling less invested. I was less interested, and I kind of realized, like I talked about earlier in this video, just like the book feels like it doesn't have much of a plot. I kind of was just like, where is the plot? I get that things still happen, and it's not that this book doesn't accomplish or say anything. While I did read the rest of it, I guess at some point I just did not feel as interested. Maybe I just got kind of tired of it. Maybe I felt that not much was happening. I don't know. I feel like I generally enjoy character-driven things, but with this I eventually started struggling a bit. There were also some other preferences I had with this book. For one thing, I said authenticity is important to him, but I think that he lies a lot as well, so he's very hypocritical, and that made him a little unlikable. I definitely didn't hate this character, but it's like he talks about a lot of people being phonies, but then he lies a lot too, because he'll say something to someone and he tells the reader if he was telling the truth or not, or what he really means or felt. So at least he was self-aware, I guess, but a lot of his behavior I disliked, and I get it, like it's an act of rebellion and angst and depression and grief and all those things. I understand why he did the things he did, but that doesn't mean I have to enjoy reading about them, especially because I feel like he didn't get that much better by the end. More on that later. Like, some of his other behaviors and language bothered me a bit. I can deal with strong language, but like some of it here was just a lot. It is still realistic and honest, so there's that. It wasn't like, oh, he's doing more bad behavior than someone actually would do in real life. Like, no, it didn't feel that way, but it's just kind of like, it's not that I got nothing out of this, but it's like I need to have a reason why I should read this instead of just listening to some other random person complain, you know? There are things to get out of this, but it's like, what should be my reason for reading this? There were things I liked about the book, but my reviews are basically always about how I personally enjoyed and experienced the book, but I will still acknowledge certain things, like maybe if I didn't like the book but it had good themes or messages, I might want to touch on that. So I'm basically saying what the book's about, some things I liked about it and didn't like about it, and just overall how I felt about it. And just, yeah, that was one of my issues, especially halfway through, as things didn't really seem to progress or get any better. I understand why he feels the way he does, and a book doesn't have to be completely wholesome for me. I mean, Holden's not exactly in a wholesome situation. It makes sense for him to feel the way he does, but just with the way a book is usually structured and just for my personal enjoyment, I think I would have liked to see perhaps some small wins for him throughout the book, some positive things that happen. I feel like not much, if anything, good happened until the end. Like, it was just misfortune after misfortune. And I understand if he needs to hit rock bottom, but it's just like, I guess if a character has a goal or something they're trying to achieve, I want to kind of have hope that they'll get there. And then when this was just so much negativity after negativity, it was like, why should I root for him? Why should I even believe that things will get better? I mean, maybe they won't, but if so, what's the point? The book's gotta have a point. Well, that's not quite how it ended, but I'm trying to express my thoughts. I've got notes, trying to be coherent. It's a little complicated. Like, I need to see him do things so that I have the belief in his ability to change and do better and get better. I would have liked to see some good things happen to him throughout the book. Maybe you disagree, maybe you feel like there were, and if you thought so, let me know. But I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I got tired of it about halfway through and for most of the ending, because it's like, okay, like, he's left the school, he's done a few things and gone to a few places and met some people, but it's like, what is this about? Where is this leading to? Like, what is the point of all this? And I mean, I get it, like, in real life, you do just go to places and talk to people, and he sometimes goes on tangents about these things, which makes sense because people have things in their real lives. But again, I could listen to any random person talk about their life, so I'm asking, why should I read this? I mean, I did read it. I get that books have themes and stuff, things you can learn from him, maybe some quotes. There is a resolution at the end though, so I will talk about that. Thankfully, if it had just kind of ended, then I wouldn't think as highly of the book as I do, which already isn't super high. I mean, it's like in the middle for me. Again, I do think that this book could be relatable for a lot of people, especially a lot of younger people. And if you can't relate to it, then this could be an opportunity for you to learn about someone else's perspective, especially someone who has lost someone like Holden has. I guess for me, it wasn't like, oh, he's struggling, but he's trying to get better. He wants to get better. It didn't feel that way for me. He didn't seem to be expressing that he wanted to do anything except just run away and perhaps kind of escape responsibility and just leave everyone he liked. And I understood that that was coming from a place of deep sadness. Maybe he didn't want to be a burden to people. But again, I'm just saying it didn't feel like he had like a particular goal for me. And I would have liked to, I mean, I get it. If he didn't have a goal, he didn't know what to do with his life. That's common, especially for young people. So I get if he didn't have a specific thing where he said, this is what I want to do. But I guess it was just like, for me, it's like he's not in a good position. I'd like to see him get better, but he didn't seem to be showing any signs of getting to there. Maybe that makes sense. And so if I don't see any evidence of him changing for the better, then it wasn't like I was reading it and I was like, okay, he's getting better. I can see he's making progress. This book does go over some difficult things and emotions that teenagers will experience, like teenage love and jealousy, and I think that that is still relevant. I liked that it was in first person. I don't mind if a book's in third person, but I felt like you really got to know a lot about him and his life and the people in his life and the places. He's very observant of people's habits and traits, and I don't mind listening to his struggles. But again, it was just like, why should I read this over something else? I mean, I could read both. I could read both this and listen to someone else complain. Not that this book is all someone complaining. I understand that there's more to it than that. I guess I'm just trying to understand. I have wondered if this book is very autobiographical for the author. With all the specific details, it kind of felt like it was, and just all the rambling on some things that may have seemed unimportant to some. I don't know anything about the author's personal life, so maybe this is based on his life. If it is, that would make more sense, and I think that this book could have been a good way for him to get out all those feelings and share them with people, but I have no idea. It could be totally different from his real life. If anybody knows anything about that, I would be interested in hearing. I'm not saying that the book would be completely useless if it wasn't autobiographical, but if it were, that would make some sense. I found some of this book entertaining and enjoyable, mostly so in the first half, but there were some things in the middle. It wasn't like I just despised the whole middle and end. Like, there were some decent things in there. One thing I particularly remember that I found interesting and I remember enjoying when I was reading was when he was going to a museum. I think his sister had gone recently because she's younger than him, and she had gone, I think, like on a class field trip, and he was going through it and talking about how everything in the museum is the same and she experiences it the same way, but it's the same as he goes later on in his life. I did like that, how that like represented these ideas of growing up and wishing things could stay the same. I could totally resonate with that. So that was a particular thing in this book that I remember enjoying. So there were some things like that that kind of represented something. I liked that. I liked that the author showed those feelings and that situation and sensation by showing something happening rather than Holden just talking or thinking about it. I think that was a good way to do it. And I felt that Holden's narration was a lot more of giving information rather than describing things, which I think I prefer. I think when things are being described a lot and I'm trying to imagine it properly, that can be harder for me, but I try. But this book, I felt, didn't do a lot of describing things, and I didn't really mind that because, I mean, It makes more sense if it's like fantasy or science fiction with things that don't exist in our world, but in this book it was pretty easy to imagine everything. Yeah, in this book there are a lot of ideas and themes, I think especially about adolescence, about not wanting to act your age, and just about life. Now earlier I said that Holden has a very distinct voice and that he repeats a lot of things, and the repetition didn't bother me at first, but after a while it started to. Some other characters are pretty repetitive in their dialogue as well, so that got a little annoying. It was realistic, but just a personal preference, kind of just, I felt like it got way too repetitive. Like, I know there was like a situation he was in and he mentioned he had a headache and then he mentioned it again on the very next page. Like, yeah, I know. Like, he was explaining why he didn't want to do something. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's part of his descent into madness or however you want to describe it. And I don't mean that in a joking way at all. I'm serious. I know he's in a serious situation. I'm just saying, like, yeah, maybe that's why he's just repeating himself, kind of. I don't know if he really went crazy or if it's more of just he's really depressed. You know, I want to be careful with the terms I'm using, because like talking about mental health, I think the way we talk about it is really important, but I'm sure you understand what I mean. So maybe that's why, or maybe that's just the writing style of the author. I don't know, but it got to be a bit much at times. And sometimes with certain phrases, it felt like they were just taking up space when they weren't necessary. But I understood it. It was a habit of the way the character spoke, perhaps a habit of the way the author wrote. Yeah, this is definitely more character driven. There doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of a plot. If you like books where people just get straight to the point, there's like a straight hard plot, you may not like this much. You may just want a plot rather than people going on a rant about why they hate when people have cheap suitcases. Again, at least he explained why, but it just gets to the point where it's like, you don't like anything, do you? And he has a conversation with his younger sister about that, where she's asking him to name things that he likes, and he was kind of struggling. I'm kind of glad that she pointed that out, because that's kind of what we were all thinking. It's like, you hate a lot of things, and I get it. I get being young and angry, and I wasn't even in the exact same situation as him, but like, I get it when you're just in that mindset and a lot of things bother you, and so you just complain about everything. I understand. And to say that he doesn't like anything is a bit of an exaggeration. I think he does care about his family, at least his siblings, especially his younger sister. I know she's pretty important in the book. So yeah, he does care at least a little about some people and things. So that was nice to see, instead of it just being he hates everyone and everything. I kind of liked that he gave so much backstory and explanation for a lot of things. I feel like that can really help the reader understand how he feels. At least I know when he would start explaining things, like when he said he hates when people have cheap suitcases, I was like, why? What is wrong with that? And then he started explaining it, and I was like, okay, I can start to understand how he feels about that. So I felt that way with a lot of things in this book. Like, I started to understand how he felt. I have tried to understand Holden as best as I can, and I try to reflect those thoughts in this review. I try to understand characters. I try to understand people in general, but even fictional characters, because they are a reflection of the author, and even though the characters aren't real, we spend a lot of time with them, and they are a reflection of real life. But yeah, it maybe would have been my preference for there to have been some bits of happiness and success throughout. And they didn't have to be big, but, you know, I guess I would have liked that. But if you feel that it was part of the book or meant to be that way for it to just be a lot of bad things, then we can discuss that as well. I think there are some things in this book that a lot of adolescents will relate to, but other than that, it is kind of depressing. And that's the point. I mean, some books are meant to make you feel sad, but it was less of like, I felt sad and emotional, and more of just, it was depressing. And I guess I wasn't bothered that he was depressed, but it was just like, why should I read this? I did feel about halfway through this book like I needed to read something more wholesome. So I did start doing that, and then eventually finished this book. And that's okay. Some books are heavy. Maybe that was it. Maybe I just had a lot of sympathy. I feel like I often do. So I do feel that it got a little better toward the end. Things were actually happening. I think there were some decent ideas and messages in there. It still had those annoyances for me. It also takes like all the way till the very end, like maybe the second or third to last chapter, for things to get better rather than a slow gradual progression, I felt like. Even though I guess everything he did leading up to that was part of the story, perhaps it was necessary to happen. It was interesting when the title of the book and the cover was explained, because I had no idea what the title meant. But I feel like people talked about how it means like he wants to save children from the corruption of the world, and that sounds like a decent idea. But I felt like he kind of expressed that idea, but then didn't do much about it. Like, I didn't really see him doing much of that. Like, okay, now he does seem to have a goal. Like I said, maybe he could have been aimless before, didn't know what he wanted to do. Here he expresses an idea, but he didn't do very much about it. And if he did, it was at like the very end. I didn't really see any of it, so it wasn't really satisfying because I didn't really see him get better or really achieve anything because that's where the author decided to end it. I felt that there wasn't very much character development. I feel like this is mostly just him wandering around and making some poor decisions, and then at the very end decides to get help. And I understand that he had to go through those things perhaps to kind of have a wake-up call and decide to get better. But again, it took like till the very end, and even then, like, it's implied he goes to a mental hospital, but you don't really hear much about him going to that. And then the book ends, so you don't really see much of his healing journey or what he does afterwards. You don't know. Maybe that's supposed to be up to the reader's interpretation. But yeah, you don't really know what happens to him. Maybe he does help children in the future or does something productive with his life, but you don't really hear about it. He does talk about a lot of things that were relatable for me. For example, I know he talks about some people and he has a desire to have an intelligent conversation with them. I get that. I definitely understand that. I think that's pretty common on BookTube though. I think we often have intelligent conversations in the comments. Sometimes people leave really long, thoughtful comments, and even if it's not long, that doesn't mean it's not intelligent. But I just mean, like, compared to comments in other places, or if people even comment at all in those places, I feel like a lot of times on BookTube we have long, nice, thoughtful, intelligent discussions. And I do like that about this place. I'm grateful that that's common on BookTube. And about Holden, I do sympathize with him, and I know that some things that have happened have not been his fault. But it's just like, I don't feel like I'm going to read or watch someone make a bunch of bad decisions and then like him. I understand. That doesn't mean I have to like him. That doesn't mean I have to like the book. I had even considered DNFing the book, but I decided to get through it. It's really popular. I know some people wanted to hear my thoughts, and it's not that long. It did take me quite a while to read it, but I did decide to get through it. If it weren't very popular and nobody else had wanted me to read it, I maybe would have just gone through with it. But I think if it's a popular book, people want me to read it, I'm going to be more likely to finish it. And yeah, like I said, some of the content was just like my own preference with how I felt about it. Like, I didn't really feel interested in hearing these guys talk about women and their sexual experiences, and then in the next chapter he's drunk, and I understand that's like normal. Some people do that, but I just, in terms of what I enjoyed or found interesting in the book, that was some of the stuff that I was just kind of tired of seeing him do things. Like, I get why he's doing these things, I get why he's turning to them, but it wasn't very enjoyable to read about. And maybe that's the point, but I'm just saying it wasn't super fun. I guess this book isn't meant to be fun. I don't know what the author's intention was with this, other than maybe to express these ideas and this angst, and that makes sense. But yeah, I had seen a review on Goodreads basically talking about how Holden is a phony too, because he calls a bunch of other people's phonies, but then, like I said, he's not super honest. When I say honest, I mean like the book itself is honest as a portrayal of that time and just teenagers in general, no matter what the time period was. But Holden himself is not always honest when he's talking to people. That's what I mean. I don't know if he's an unreliable narrator. I feel like he's honest with the reader, but when it comes to talking to people, he does not always tell the truth for whatever reason. I'll put the Goodreads review on screen. I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of it. This review is a bit more aggressive than how I would word it, but mainly just the ideas about Holden being a phony too. I could see his point, and I agreed with some of that. Ultimately, I'm giving this book 3 stars, which for me is like okay. It wasn't horrible, but I didn't love it either. It's just right in the middle there. I'm still glad I read this book. I'm glad that I have read it, especially because it's a very popular classic book. I look forward to having discussions about it, and that's part of why I'm glad I read it, so that we can talk about it, because now I've read the whole thing. I am completely open to discussing the book, hearing other people's perspectives of it, and ways they may have interpreted certain things. Some people like myself can struggle if they're not told things directly, and so maybe there were even some things in this book that I missed. So if you've read this book and want to share any of your thoughts on it with me, I would love to discuss it with you in the comments. I tried expressing my thoughts about this book. I apologize if it was messy at all. I tried to do what I could. I take notes, but like I said, I had mixed feelings about it. And with a lot of this book, it's like, there were definitely some good things about it, but then the other things, it's like, I understood, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with it. Like, I can understand why people would do a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that it's all justifiable or okay. So yeah, it was a little complicated. The book was okay. There were some good things. It started off strong for me, but I just didn't come away from it absolutely loving it. And I didn't feel that the ending was very strong either. It didn't feel very hopeful, even though he was supposedly finally taking a step towards getting better. It did not feel very hopeful. I said that it got better towards the end, but I don't mean that the ending was amazing. But anyway, you can let me know your thoughts, and thank you for watching.